Oh, and my alarm just went off. And we're live.
Yep, and I just got the live notice too.
Good morning. Fancy meeting you here on the internet today.
Hello, all the random folks out there. We're just opening this up and letting it go for a moment because sometimes it takes a while between the stream starting and the links appearing on Facebook.
Yep.
So nothing's really going on right now, don't worry. Oh, hello, Winter Moon. I'm just finding that interesting because the translation of my name actually means Winter Moon, so.
That's awesome. I actually never knew that.
Yeah.
I learned something new.
Yeah, the full form is actually the Micmac word for December, which was when I was born. And it just means winter moon, really. So.
That's awesome. All right, here we go. I have found us on the Facebook page. Now I can make us an announcement. There we go.
I can still hear you. It's just really warm.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I mean, and by morning, I mean it's totally not morning anymore.
For most of us.
Morning to me.
Well, yes,
well,
good
because
morning.
You live somewhere silly.
You Coloradan, you.
It's much warmer here. I'm just saying. Like 90 or something today. We are still waiting for one of our hosts.
Yeah, one of our panelists.
Give her or them a minute or two.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly message to check, but we can always start with some of the intro stuff first.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that the reason Danny isn't here yet has to do with animals.
Right.
It's so appropriate.
Their horses are super cute, too. They're super cute. They have a nice bird. Down there,
this is so nice.
I don't know, 6 months ago we went down there. And the patio pass doesn't disband. The patio pass always disbands at like 4 a.m.
I think.
Also, feel free to ask good questions. That was Jessica down in the comments.
Yeah, I feel like it was still going when I went to bed at 5. Slightly late for me, but I had trouble getting to sleep because I was so excited about Gather.
Pretty good so far. Surprising how well this has worked out.
Yeah, I love it. I want to do more.
Actually, yeah, I want to bring that up for afterwards about having more virtual stuff continuing forward.
It would be so good. We'll get to see everybody.
It has worked out really well.
Yeah. Good conversations can still happen.
Okay, so we've actually hit 1 o'clock, so I guess we can just start our random intro stuff, and then once Danny gets here, we can just let them in.
Sounds great. I will take care of that. I'm just here to field questions and throw questions at the panel, so we don't have to have panelists who are both reading questions and responding to questions and also having a conversation. So I will leave the introductions to the both of you.
We strongly encourage questions. We love questions, so feel free to shout it out. We will try to get to everything during our period of time.
Yeah, we have an outline of what we want to talk about, but really more than anything, you're going to have 3 weirdos who have been at this way too long. So if you have questions, just feel free to shoot them at us, and Illyria will make sure that we don't miss them, hopefully.
Yes, and if we do get overwhelmed with questions, remember that later tonight at about 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be having another open discussion and Q&A, and you can show back up then and answers.
Okay, so, Cio, do you want to just give a brief intro on who you are?
Oh, man. How much are we including? So, my name is Cio. I have been around on the Otherkin scene since 98, I think it was. How I found it when I was a kid is you know how you do those things throughout your life, and to you they're perfectly normal because this is just your body, this is just life. Um, I grew up not realizing not everybody had wings. It was just normal, like, okay, of course you have wings. This is a thing that is your life. This is what you do. And then later on, the people were like, no, that's not real, and no one does that. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But this was early internet days, and so you could wander off and find people. Not quite so easy as now. There's a bit of luck involved, but there was also much smaller community. So once you found people, it was much easier to sort of network. And I found other people who had wings and other bits and bobs, and got heavily involved with the community at the time. And then through the community, found the Kheperuans and started coming to gatherers like 20 years ago. So that is a bit of background on me. Since then, I have moved around a lot. My day job is very technical and has nothing to do with it. And that's my cat. I don't have anything else to say.
And sorry, 1 second. I'm actually just messaging with Danny right now.
I'll keep talking then. So yeah.
You've got a fantastic starting question if you want to just pounce on it, Theo. What
Sure.
is an Otherkin? What does it mean?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a broad question, and it has changed throughout the years. The general definition that I use is that you are something other than human in a human body. It's pretty broad term. Some people don't use the term quite so broadly. They tend to exclude things like werewolves and vampires and elves and dragons and a bunch of other stuff, and just sort of mince it down a bit. I prefer the broader term because I think it is more applicable to more people and more true to what we're actually talking about. Tess, do you have a...
Yeah, I'd basically agree with that. I usually phrase it as someone who identifies as inhuman or other than human on some level, because when we get into more of the details on what Otherkin are and different types of Otherkin, what it means to be something is very different between people, and their reasoning behind why they believe it or what they think caused it differs. So rather than just using a definition that says clearly what an Otherkin is in terms of why they are other, I just leave it open in that regard.
There are some people, and I forgot again, who have traits that they consider genetic as well. So it's not always having to do with the subtle body so much. I have noticed elves in particular. I know several who trace their lineage back pretty far, and they're pretty sure that great-great-great-grandma or grandpa had some fun outside of normal bounds. So.
Neat. Oh, it looks like we might have a Danny.
Nice.
Volunteer hats, everybody. I guess I need to do that. All right. Well, we might have, okay, this might be a connection screen issue.
Yeah.
But at least we know that Danny is alert, aware, and attempting to join.
You see you, sort of.
Yeah, it looks like a still, so I'm not sure
Oop.
they're actually ready to
No,
go.
it's moving slowly.
Moving.
Oh. Well, then my question for both of you while we wait for Danny's connection to get better is if you want to start diving into the questions and discussions that you had gotten ready and see how far we go.
Sure.
All right.
So, Chess, I think you still need to do an intro.
Oh, yes. So if you missed the other thing I did last night, I'm Kess. I'm an ally of House Kheperu as a CO. I'm the ally guardian, and I have been involved in the Otherkin community since I think it was around 2002, about there. It was near the end of my high school. Um, I actually ran my city's Otherkin monthly meetup for 7 years, I think it was. So it's not just that I have identified myself in this way for so long, but I have been actively involved in online communities as well as several different in-person communities, because there are actually like live meetup groups. A lot of people try to talk about Otherkin like it's an online phenomenon, but it really isn't the case. And in fact, I met CO probably around 2003 or so at an Otherkin convention. So
it was a good one. There are still conventions that go every year. That one is no longer, which is sad. That was a very fun convention. I met a lot of my Otherkin friends at Walking the Thresholds, which is one that's sort of still going. And it is honestly quite nice to go to an Otherkin convention. Not that this convention is not fun or anything, but you get a lot more specific classes, and you can talk with people who have a lot of similar issues and thoughts and concerns as you. And we're chatting with our co-host. But yeah, some history. I know people who have been identifying and talking with and about Otherkin since the 80s. And before that, I obviously wasn't alive then. Well, I was alive in the 80s, but not alive for all of that. Thank you. And from there, it did sort of blossom once the internet came along. We were able to really start connecting with more distant people. I was fortunate as a teen to actually find people near me to communicate with, but not everyone is so fortunate. So the internet has really provided us a means to communicate with one another, which has been lovely.
Yeah, building off that, you can actually trace the online Otherkin community back to at least 1996 or 1995.
Yeah.
It started back on one of those alt email lists, like before there were even message boards and stuff like that. You only had group emails going back and forth, and you can trace it back to, like I said, 96 or 95. I forget exactly when. And then
you can trace it back to the. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Danny.
I believe you can trace it back to Usenet days.
Yeah.
Old.
And one thing I want to say in terms of like the history of Otherkin is the word and the community and our understanding of it are modern, but the concept of Otherkin is not necessarily new. Lots of different cultures have had beliefs about people who were not completely human or were something else in human form. CO had mentioned like there's people who believe their elven nature traces back to something genetic, and that's actually something that has existed in Irish folklore for centuries. Is that the elven creatures, they didn't call them elves, interbred with humans, or sometimes even just pretended to be humans, and that bloodline carried forward. Or if you've been to any of Zosh's class, he often talks about the Watcher Angels from the Bible, and that's a story right there about people who were angels and humans, like a hybrid. And so you can trace the idea of being something other back to that. In Buddhism, you have beings like Nagas and Rakshasas who often would take on human forms and live in this society that way to do something. So Otherkin itself as a word and the modern community and the current community is modern, but you can trace a lot of it back, or similar concepts if you go farther back.
And if you want, there was a member of the Otherkin community who put a lot of work into developing a kind of timeline. Orion Scribner's Otherkin timeline. It's a long PDF file. He
really
traces it. Yeah, he traces it back to some magazines in the 70s, actually, as far as like some of the concepts, like the Elf Queen's Daughters and things like
The
that.
Silver Elves.
So if you Google Orion Scribner, and we can post a link later, I guess. I'm guessing.
We're actually working on that right now.
Awesome.
We can posting a link, and there also is a copy of the PDF on otherkin.com.
Perfect.
So there is also a question from so at least a couple of the folks in the chat. I'm curious what types of otherkin are out there, and also what types of otherkin each of you identify as.
Does someone want to tackle what's out there?
Sure. I'll pull that ball of wax apart. So I actually can't tell you how many types there are. There's literally that many. Otherkin can be as quote unquote simple as being I'm a werewolf. To talk about some of the questions we had been asked previously, or it can be more complex. Me, myself, I identify as something a wee bit more complex, and always have. And I usually stick with the title polymorph just because it's probably the easiest one to identify as, but it is not exactly the most accurate term. It's just sort of what I use. And I know a few different otherkin that sort of fall into that same category, who are, well, I'm a werewolf, but I have wings and metal bits and other stuff. And it can be subjective. And I'm very hesitant to say, there's 10 types of otherkin and that's it, and everybody else is wrong, because it's really not on me to make that distinction.
And building off that, like saying, that, there were only 10 types or whatever, the definition we use of otherkin is someone who is not human on some level. Well, even just thinking about Earth and our mythology, how many things do we have that are not human? So right there, that just shows you how many different types of otherkin there can be. Some are definitely more common, but since the identity is based upon being something other than human, I don't think we could even hazard a guess at how many types of otherkin there are, because if you look at how many things on Earth are not human, how many things in our mythology are not human, and then if you want to include things like beliefs in other planets or other dimensions or stuff like that, you're approaching infinity, probably.
Yeah.
And the second part, I guess, was what am I? So I'm a Rakshasa, where creatures, we appear in Buddhism and Hinduism. Whether or not we're demons or good guys or bad guys kind of depends on what mythology you're reading, and when it came out. But we are protective spirits, and we are, to use Sio's term, like we're polymorphic. We are shapeshifters. We don't have anything in terms of a united form or a singular appearance. The core of what we are is the duty to protect rather than anything external or projective like that.
Okay.
We can go down to Danny.
Danny, are you working?
Okay. I think so. Am I?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
So I'll take the opportunity to introduce myself too, since I came in late. Technical difficulties and yeah. So I'm Danny. I use they them pronouns, and I've been in the otherkin community since 2002, 2001, somewhere in there. So not as long as those two, but a while.
But between us, that's 60 years of experience in the community, if you want to feel old.
We're old. Okay. So yeah, so since I was about like 15, I've been identifying that way. And I identify myself as primarily a therianthropy. Therianthropy being, I don't know if y'all covered this already.
Nope, not yet. So
okay, I started out in the Therian community, which is the animal people who identify as animals that are of Earth, right? so non-mythological creatures. And so they're like kind of a subcategory of Otherkin, though there's community debates around what category is where and who belongs where is a ongoing thing, but we're going to include them under Otherkin under the umbrella of saying that Otherkin are anyone who identifies as something in some way as something other than human. And so I identify as a rough-legged hawk, or Buteo lagopus, which is in the same grouping family as red-tailed hawk or buzzard. It's the buzzard group of raptors. And I have also a more complicated identity with phoenix or firebird. I say complicated because it sounds more woogity than it actually is for me, but going into all the details of the why and how is more than would take longer than this panel is scheduled for.
Obligatory disclaimer. There's too much to talk about.
Yep.
There's always much to talk about.
CEO mentioned very briefly a bit on what brought them to identify as Otherkin.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't touched on it yet, but since you were just explaining parts of your identity, Danny, do you want to give your like blurb on how it came about for you?
I'm bad at being succinct, but I will try. So I basically I had experience with being different or other for a long time, and had a lot of my anxiety episodes would manifest as a kind of nonverbal, instinctive feeling, adrenaline. Like I would feel more animalistic, and it showed up for me in a bird-like way. And then I stumbled across the concept of therianthropy and Otherkin and went, oh, you mean this might be more than just like metaphor? These metaphors I've been using for myself around bird as a concept for myself, or as a description. And then it took me a long time to narrow it down from there, but bird was easy. And that, like in my dreams, I almost never showed up when I dreamed as myself, I never showed up as human. I showed up as usually a bird of some kind. But yeah, so those things all led me to, like, it was pretty easy for me to go, oh, I'm not entirely human, I'm avian in some way. Narrowing down specifics took a lot longer.
Okay, and as for me, there's all the standard. Didn't quite feel like I fit in as a child, and did odd things, but really, like, consciously understanding or identifying as other than human started in high school. I was actually working through a book on working with animal spirits, and I was trying to do the one ritual, and things kind of went sideways for me, and I was having bizarre experiences of being in actually a bird body and having trouble understanding what was going on, and it really confused me for that weekend. And then I went to school on the next Monday, and my one friend walks up to me in the hallway and literally says, "Have you heard of Convention North? It's another kin gather. It's a convention for Otherkin and Therians and people like you." And at that point, I had not heard the terms Otherkin or Therian or discussed anything like that. It was just one of those weird coincidences in life where I was just spent a weekend trying to figure out what was going on with me, and then someone literally walked by me in the hallway and gave me the words to start looking up on the internet. And then that just led to a lot of trying to figure out what my experiences meant, how to frame them, and just spending years and years, and even to this day, just trying to understand and refine that understanding of myself a bit more.
It's really a journey that never entirely stops, because we're always evolving as people. There's always something more to find.
Yeah, there is.
Now, I do want to touch on one thing. I'm not sure if this is the most appropriate spot, but I remember it right now, so I'm going to do it now. We talk a lot, or have been talking a lot, about our past. Well, we haven't quite talked about our past lives, but it's sort of been implicit that we've had these past lives where we've got these things, and it is a lot of something. I know, that's where I'm going. Where you see a lot of people who talk about, I'm otherkin because I used to be a this, or I used to be a that, or I used to be whatever. That is not all of otherkin. You can totally be, I am a this thing, but I never was born into this thing at a previous point in time. So don't let any conversation that we might have going forward or right now make you feel less like that just because we might be talking about past lives or past times. And I'm sorry, Danny.
No, I'm just trying to not forget, get distracted. So I wanted to comment on that. Also, just because you were something other than human in a past life doesn't mean you're otherkin. For me, I don't believe I was ever physically Hawk or physically Phoenix on the physical plane in a embodied life. And also, it is something that I am now. It is not something that I was or something that I have a memory of being. I am not I have memory of when I was 10, but I am not 10 any longer. So just having a memory of that or having an experience of that doesn't make me that. It influences me now and is part of who I am because of it, because of the experiences I went through. But I no longer have the mindset of a 10-year-old. Maybe I might have maybe I might flash back into that emotional state sometimes, like a shift for people, but I'm not that anymore. And so for me, it's not sufficient to just have been something in a past life. If that informs your identity and that works for you as identity and that identity is useful for you, if you're like, okay, I was this in a past life, and so that's part of who I am, and maybe that is who I am, or is a major part of my identity, that's cool. That's good for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like there's more to it than just a memory. Even if it was just like, even if you were another kind of past life, like what about that memory is so impactful that it's still influencing your experiences today?
Going forward, if we pop into another body, are we going to say, well, I'm a human kin? No, we're in a dragon body. We're in human kin. And you could, like, there has been that discussion. Sorry, guys.
No worries. That's basically where I was going to go. So some people do use past lives as their, for lack of a better term, justification or their reasoning for being otherkin. But not everyone agrees with that. Like, I'm also in the boat of, I have been many things and many people, but I am not them. Like, even just thinking of it in terms of humanity, you know, I've had past lives in Japan. I've had past lives in France. I am not Japanese and I am not French. You know, that was someone else back then. Just because you were something doesn't mean you are. I tend to think is, if you're using otherkin as a soul concept, it goes deeper than just what meat suit you have worn in the past. It is something more integral to your being. And if we want, I think that would actually be a good time to build off on the different types or theories of otherkin, because CO was mentioning past lives. That tends to be one of the more common theories, that, you know, it's a past life thing, it's a soul thing, but there are lots of otherkin who do not identify in those ways. So what else is there?
The past life one is more common in the mythic otherkin community. The Therian community had a while, and mind you, this was years ago, where they had a bit of a backlash against anything that seemed remotely mystical or mythic or overly spiritual. There was a whole cultural thing. We're not going to get into it, but so there was a lot. There was a more common trend for a long time in the Therian community of not believing that your animality came from a past life, but rather that it came from a soul thing or something psychological or something neurological even.
Yeah, there are some people who their otherkin identity, they understand it as a psychological aspect of themselves. Like, they definitely are what they think they are, but it's not about their soul or their energy. It's just, for some reason, in some way, their brain is wired like that, or has an element of those things. That's also more of a common thing with the Therians rather than the more mythic Otherkin.
Yeah. I'm a psychotherapist. I've got a master's degree in counseling, and I've often long had a psychological bent as far as trying to find explanations for things. I also think that trying to explain it purely psychologically, I don't, for myself, feel is accurate. But I've definitely tried to, because I go through cycles of doubt and belief where if it's been a little while since I had an experience I can't explain away through just brain-based explanations, then I'll start being like, well, it could have been just my perception. It could have been confirmation bias. It could have been any number of these things. And then I'll have a significant experience, like going to gather usually will correct that and be like, oh no, I can't actually explain that through just psychology. So I can see that, I can understand the temptation, but for me, also, I have experienced plenty of times where I've picked up that someone is otherkin in some way. I probably about 30 people over the course of my life, maybe 40, where I've sensed, oh, that person pings to me as something that's not entirely human, and then I'll like dance around the subject with them, and then eventually figure out that okay, they do kind of identify that way, so I can actually broach the subject without them thinking I'm crazy. But it's been accurate, and so there's something there that's perceivable, I think.
If you ever get the chance to go to an event like Gather or Otherkin convention, it's honestly really interesting and fun to, before you even start engaging people, just like looking around at people and trying to figure out if there's something else, and if so, what, and why do you think that, and all of those things really help reinforce the idea that there might be something to this, because like Danny was saying, like if this was all psychological or if this was all in our head in some other way, we wouldn't be at events like this and look at someone and go, you kind of feel like a dragon, have you ever thought about that? And having them say, well, yeah, like I do, I feel my wings, I identify as dragon, whatever. So it's a great way to reinforce or feel better about that belief. And if either of you had nothing to add on there is two things you said, Danny, I would like to circle back to.
I'll add one. There was a trend in the Therian community as well of emphasizing that this isn't totems, that this isn't an external spirit that is a guide or influence, and that's because that's something separate from therianthropy. I think that honestly comes from a misunderstanding of what that sort of titular spirit relationship can be. A Western understanding of it is that is an animal guide is something external to you that comes and guides you. Whereas in some other cultures, like the Norse have the Filja, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, and which is a part of you that is can show up as an animal, and the and I don't know if anyone knows Ravenari, Moon Voice, but their background is Russian, Siberian area, and their belief there is that there is the animal that is you, and that's your totem equivalent culturally, and it shows up in your behavior and in your mannerisms, and it is not just an external guide, it is also that which is you. And since we don't have a concept for that in the West because of our interpretation of spirit guides being external or totems, I hate to use that word, but I can't think of a better one to explain this concept right now. Being external influences rather than who you are, part of who you are. We come up with therianthropy to explain the same experience. in some cases, I think. But knowing that part of you, being able to identify the personal one, is rare in those cultures. Usually what's more important is your family one, or your group, your tribe or clan, or larger group. Those are the important ones that everyone knows about themselves, whereas the individual one is more rare to know about and to figure out, and for it to be strong enough to influence you to that degree and that you recognize it and know it is considered a powerful thing. So I honestly think it's a very similar concept or parallel concept. I don't think all people have the same explanation as to why they're otherkin. I think there's many different explanations. Like for some people maybe it is psychological and that's the cause. Some people it is maybe more totemic and that's the cause of it. And for some people I think it's past life. For some people it's a soul thing or a walk-in spirit that's external and becomes internal. There's any number of other explanations. Those are the big ones that come to mind.
Okay, so Danny, if I can
Yeah.
slightly put you on the spot because of some of your
Okay.
earlier comments.
Okay.
You had both mentioned that professionally you are, I can never remember the difference. Is it psychotherapist in your case?
Yeah, counselor is licensed professional counselor, but if I say just therapist or if I say just counselor, people don't know what specifically I'm talking about, so I say psychotherapist to clarify.
Okay, so yeah, that is Danny's professional background.
Mm-hmm.
And also mentioned the whole feeling like I'm not crazy. Well, some of the questions that came up were things like, is this just, someone having some sort of mental break? Is this a response to trauma? Are these people in some way mentally off? Do you want to field some of that?
If I try to figure out what is objective reality when it comes to spiritual experiences, spiritual subjective experiences, and what is false, which I have tried for a long period of time, then I will go mad myself trying to figure it out, and I will never actually let myself experience my experiences. I will just sit there and go in circles questioning it all day. And so the approach I've come to, instead of, is this objectively real, or is this some sort of manifestation of trauma or manifestation of a neurodivergence, has been, well, how much does that matter? Is it beneficial, or is it harmful, or is it benign? Is it harming your ability to function as a person, or is it helping? So if something is interfering with your ability to function, which it's interfering with your ability to get your work done, or go to school, or whatever it is or like get through your day-to-day life and do the things you have to do to function as a human being in this world. If it's getting in the way of that, impairing that, then you want to take a closer look at it as to what's the source of this, or how can I manage it in a way that makes it more functional. And the other piece is it causing you significant distress or harm? Because if it is, that's time to take a closer look and figure out better ways to manage it. Some of it is a lot of people who are otherkin do have developmental trauma histories, or are on the autism spectrum, or have ADHD. There's been theories as to why that seems to be a correlation. And I could theorize forever on that. It's a very chicken or egg, I think. I suspect, if you aren't entirely human, that's going to show up in your body or in your brain when you translate a non-human spirit into a human body. And it's going to show up as not non-normative ways of thinking and of making connections, like neuroatypicality. So is it a manifestation of those things? Is it caused by those things? Is it less valid if it is? I don't think so. I think maybe sometimes it's something that's there that you don't realize until you've had something trigger it or bring it to the surface. I think people who have been through a lot of developmental trauma are more in touch with their instincts and their adrenal and their survival instincts and fight and flight and all of that because they've had to be, and so then they're more likely to recognize the animalness in them or the otherness in them. I think people who are neurodiverse are more likely, they already feel other, they're more likely to question and to think about and to recognize that.
Excellent, thank you. Sio, there was the question in the chat you had wanted to tackle.
Do you want to hit that now, or do you want to? That's fine. There was a couple that I saw flow through. There was one that I saw in particular that was, what is the difference between Therian and furry? Which may not be the best place for me to talk. Danny might be a better person to talk on that, because I know what my definitions are, but Danny's more in the Therian side.
I've been talking too much. You talk.
For me, personally, and this might be wrong, there's a lot of crossover. So you're going to see furries in the Therian community and Therians in the furry community, but I tend to think of furry as more of a thing that you are doing, whether or not it touches on your sexuality or anything else, or whether or not you wear a fursuit or anything else. I tend to think of furry as more of a community based around sort of an activity set.
And an aesthetic.
Where Therian is more about who and what you are on the inside, and how it sort of expresses in your natural life. And that might be something that you then take over to the furry community, and it might be the furry community is how you figure out, like, this is, it's not just a suit I like to wear, it's me as a person. But that's the distinction in my mind, that there's a lot of flow back and forth.
One of the overlap areas is what's in the furry community. There's a subgroup called spiritual furries or spiritual furs, and they're furry fans who also identify in some way on a spiritual level as their persona or their animal. And I think that's an area where it's basically the same thing as therianthropy. They just don't have the Therian words for it. They have furry words for it.
Furry words, yeah.
I know a lot of furries that have several personas, and that's who they are. Today, I feel like being, Catra the Brave or something. I can't think of words. I try to think of cat, and I watched too much She-Ra. So my brain is like, Catra? I'm like, okay, sure, let's just go with that. Or there's something else, and that's not who they are. It's just their persona at that moment, for whatever that means to them.
Does that make She-Ra? Does that make She-Ra Adora a furry fan? Sorry.
We're not supposed to give out.
Oh.
But hopefully that addressed the questions, because it came up from at least two people who were asking for differences. So kind of like going with the one phrase Sio used, in a lot of ways, furry is something you're interested in and something you do. Whereas Therian is more about who you are, what you are.
More about soul identity.
Yes.
So there's another question from the chat that I think is potentially really valuable for a lot of people who are more new to the concept of otherkin. It is, I know that understanding your kin type has a lot to do with self-discovery. What techniques did you find effective when you were looking into who you are?
Meditation is really like the one that is always like thrown in there. Journals, recording things, sensations. I am a big believer in it, though terrible at doing it, of writing things down and keeping track of things. And then you look back and you're like, oh, well, here's a trend and here's a thing that happened. And I find it is harder to track and easier to lose track if you just keep it all in your head. And it feels to me like you, I don't want to say believe it yet less, but for those that just keep things in their heads and never write anything down, I feel like they frequently aren't as secure in who and what they are because it's just a thing that's in their head. I don't know, that could just be me. But I discovered it through, well, meditation and inner searching and feeling sort of odd and looking for a community, and then discussing within, it was, and I think still is, a big part of the kin community to sort of let you self-identify and let you sort of self-discover so that we don't push you in one direction. Like if I look at someone and say, hey, that's a dragon, to use what Cass said before, I don't want to go up to you and be like, well, you're a dragon, because hey, I've now put my impressions on you, and I could be wrong, or I could push you in a direction that's entirely wrong, or there's a lot of different things. But
well, and the process of self-discovery is valuable in and of itself. Like even if you're wrong now, and like if I tell you what you are and you just agree with me, like we've bypassed and robbed you of that process of self-discovery.
yeah,
One of the most frustrating but also ultimately helpful things that I have learned in association with the house.
it's hard to do. You really want to help people. For me, anyway, I don't know. As you can say, enjoy talking, and I do enjoy helping people. And sometimes you do. You want to give them that, like, oh yeah, no, you're totally a thing, and you're definitely this, and blah blah blah. And you want to be the one to really smooth out and help their anxieties. It feels good inside, but you're not helping them, and you shouldn't do that. You should really help them discover themselves on their own.
Support them in their process rather than doing it for them, rather than trying to fix it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, Lyra, you got cut off.
Oh no, I was good.
Okay. Yeah, so a couple of people have said it, but I'm a huge advocate of writing stuff down, and depending on how you want to take this, I'm also a huge advocate of writing stuff down and not researching. So with me, when I started to come to terms with, so I'm not human, but I have to figure out what this is. When I first came across Rakshasa, and the little blurb I saw seemed like this might be something in the same ballpark as me, I literally spent the next 2 years recording everything I could in terms of, was there a past life memory associated with it? Was there a specific instinct associated with it? What about the way I viewed the world could relate to this? And then it was only after 2 years of writing all of this stuff down that I let myself actually start researching what Rakshasa were. And for me, at least, that is invaluable to the core or the strength of my identity, because if I had have been like, oh, this sounds about right, let me read the Wikipedia article, let me, read the Encyclopedia Britannica's explanation from Hinduism, like, I wouldn't be able to say how much was me and how much was what I had just read. So for me, it was really important not to research it. Once I had an idea, I completely avoided looking into that anymore, because I didn't want that to color my self-understanding.
And to sort of build off on that, and to answer one of the questions I saw going forward, or before, sorry, what might bring you to this understanding might be something you see in media. It might be an anime, or it might be a book series, or something else, and it might spark something in you and go like, oh, well, that's me right there. I strongly encourage you after that point to separate yourself from whatever that media was. Don't look at it anymore, don't research anymore, and start your journey on your own to find out who and what you are on your own. It's very easy to take things that you've seen in general and sort of build them in your head into your own mythology. It's good to separate yourself from that and sort of figure out what is more true to who you are inside, as opposed to what you're seeing. But I don't think anything is invalid in terms of identifying. That's how you identify and who you are. I'm not going to point at you and be like, you're not that thing. That's really not my place.
So
for me, it's a...
No, go, Dan.
Go ahead. Recording things.
Sorry, there's just a slight lag between us.
Yeah.
So journaling and recording stuff, think about, if you think you might be otherkin, there's obviously a reason you think you might be something other than human. Start peeling that apart. Where is this weird clash happening for you, start looking into those things, those places or those moments where you'd feel the most other. Some people, they find a lot of use out of things like dream work and things like that. I personally didn't get anything from that, but it's a valid way that any sort of information from your life can bubble up for you. So for some people, it does start coming to them in dreams, or they're always noticing in dreams that they tend to be a bird rather than a human, or things like that. And if you want to believe that Otherkin is something soul-based or energetic-based, it goes back to what Danny was saying about, picking up other people. Don't trust someone's explanation of you whole cloth, for sure. But it is also helpful, once you're starting to come to terms with this, to engage with people who deal with Otherkin and see what impressions they have. Or even more surprisingly, deal with people who don't deal with Otherkin, might not even believe in Otherkin, might not even know of Otherkin, but in some way they're, psychic, sensitive, a magic worker, whatever you want to call it. And, work with them about what their perceptions on you are, because that can really start to clue some stuff in. And I know one of my friends did exactly that. She went to her local Wicca New Age store, and person didn't have an idea about Otherkin, but they did do energy healing for the body. And so she kept going in for that and was listening to what the person said, because they kept talking about feeling movement and gusts and flows coming off of the person's back. And they felt like they had wings. So it was a really good verification for them to see that people who don't even believe in the Otherkin stuff or know about the Otherkin stuff, they're picking up something happening there. So that might mean something. There might actually be something there.
For me, it was a both and approach as far as recording versus researching. I tend to perceive through body sensations, through somatic and sensory experiences, as far as energy goes, and as far as my own shifts between human and bird in this case. Not everyone experiences a shift between states of being, and I don't really experience them much anymore, because I've sort of integrated birdness into where I'm sort of always a little bit human, a little bit bird, as far as my mental state, as far as my energetic state. And so I don't have extreme shifts back and forth anymore, when I was less aware or less accepting of it, when I fought it more in myself. But having those hard shifts of experiencing those sudden phantom limbs and experiencing those sudden mental changes did give me contrast and something to observe and record. And so I could observe and record, okay, I start feeling this cramping in my arm, and my arm wants to go in this direction and in this position, kind of like wings. I start feeling the palate in my mouth feels like it's hollowing out into a beak, and it definitely feels more like a hooked beak, and observing all of that. And my perception is not, I don't perceive visually, so trying to differentiate between the different kinds of buzzard is very hard if you don't see colors, and if you can't look behind you and see, oh, my tail is red or not red, right? I don't have that skill set. And so for me, there was also a lot of doing research, exposing myself to a bunch of different birds. I volunteered at a wildlife rehab center for a while in high school when I was trying to figure this out. And I would just observe my internal reaction to different animals. Sometimes there is a sense of kinship or recognition. And so a lot of it for me was starting with a felt sense and going from there, starting with this subtle, oh, that feels closer. I was able to interact with a lot of different raptors and go, okay, it's not a vulture. Okay, it's not an eagle. All right, not a falcon, and narrow it down that way. And it wasn't until I encountered a rough-legged hawk in person years later, years after having gone, okay, I'm some sort of boodio, some sort of buzzard, maybe a red tail, but it doesn't feel quite right, but that's about as close as I can find. And then I went to an open house for a raptor center out here in Colorado. And when I was like 22, 21, and encountered this hawk, and I'm like, what is that? Because it was instant recognition feeling. And it was just and I was just like staring and like observing and watching this hawk going, that. And it was a rough-legged hawk. And then I went and did research. But of course, by that point, I've already recorded all of my the habitats in which I feel most at home, the environments in which that feel most correct for me or most soothing or calming for me, my likes, dislikes, tendencies, instincts. I'd already observed and recorded all that by that point. And so looking up rough-legged hawk and going, oh, this matches all those things. Okay, this one's where it's at. Worked really well for me. So if you're an animal person, being able to expose yourself to that animal or to the various animals that you think it might be, like in person, I find very, very helpful. Obviously, you can't do that if you're mythic.
Can't do it if your species never lived here.
Physically, yeah.
Danny, in the chat, someone just asked if you could explain what shift means.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to. So shifting is when you shift or gradiate, I guess. If you imagine there's the human mindset and your human body. A shift is when you become either more aware of the other part of you or that part of you becomes more prominent. So I will mentally shift into from human to bird by feeling more bird-like. I will lose words. I will get much more instinctive. I will be very acutely aware of any little prey movements in the ground and in the grass. And that's kind of a mental, I'll be much more instinctive and adrenal reaction, fight, flight. And then if I want to shift back towards human, which I find a very useful concept that I don't hear much talk about, but that's a way for me to ground. I start thinking about, okay, words, think about words, use words, think about manual dexterity, and using my hands. They're not wings, they're hands, things like that. There's also phantom limb shifts where you become more aware of, or your phantom limbs become more prominent, which is to say your maybe wings that you don't physically have, but you could feel, for example. Or there's any number of kinds of shifts. A shift is when the other than human aspect of yourself becomes more prominent, conscious, visible. You move more into that state from your everyday state or from your more human coded state.
This actually leads into another question that I bookmarked from the chat, which is it possible for some otherkin to physically manifest aspects of their other self so that other people can see them or perceive them? I would add to that.
Yes. That actually reminds me of a funny story, and I kind of wish Josh was here because it tells it the best. That convention where we all met Kes, and late at night, it was me and a gentleman who is a satyr, who I haven't seen in ages, and Josh and several other people. And I guess Josh was looking around and then looked at our friend and was like, "Oh my God, your eyes are like goat eyes." And then they looked at me and they're like, "Oh God, it's like Beetlejuice." And that was kind of their first sense that this is not like some crazy thing in people's heads, because you could see sort of the manifestation of how things were. I tend to notice that it gets more prominent when I'm doing a lot of energy work, or if I'm straight out of ritual, or something that's pumping that up a bit more. As in my normal everyday life, I tend to tone it down for a lot of reasons, but I have found it is not always the best thing to have manifested at all times.
Yeah, eyes tend to be the ones that if anything physically changes, I think eyes are it. people have definitely noticed eye color changes in others, and have commented on it. Mine not so much, but like a friend of mine, their eyes go from brown to like almost red or black, and people will comment on it when they are more in their dragon aspect. It's more prominent.
And there's one question on Otherkin and Shapeshifter. I think we kind of touched on a little bit. Dan, Dan, your cats might be better on this one, as you're both better with actual definitions. Either one, if you want to handle it, I can muddle through it. But
what's the question?
So the question we have is, do you make a distinction between Otherkin and Shapeshifter? And for me, that's not something you can directly answer, because you have to understand what you mean by shapeshifter in this case. So Sio is something polymorphic, she changes her form a lot. Rakshasa are shapeshifters. We don't have a set form, we change. So the question becomes, what you're referring to as shapeshifter, why or how are they doing what they do? Because the types of energetic shifts and changes that can happen to people who are Otherkin and shapeshifter types are skills that anyone can learn. There are lots of magical traditions where you learn how to astrally shapeshift or to shapeshift your energy body when you're working. But that's not the core of that person. They're not doing it because they are a shapeshifter. It's something they have learned to do. So,
and it might even,
no, go ahead.
And it might even be a more natural talent. Like they might have a talent for it that they can then develop further as a skill. Or it might be maybe someone doesn't have a talent for it and they have to work harder to develop as a skill. That doesn't mean that the person who naturally has a talent for it is a polymorphic critter, is something that doesn't have a set form and is therefore naturally inclined to shapeshifting, and shapeshifting is part of their identity. It might just mean like I'm not a shapeshift. I'm not a polymorph. My Otherkin identity is pretty fixed, and I don't have other things that I also feel like I am, but I am what I've heard called shape strong, which is to say you have some natural ability at shapeshifting. Shapeshifting comes fairly easy to me on a energetic or astral level, but it's not because that's part of my nature. It's just a talent I have and have developed.
Interesting. There's also a couple of questions floating around about the interactions between Otherkin and animals. Have you noticed, are animals more likely to react well to all Otherkin, to certain types of Otherkin? Are there patterns there, or is it more individual?
Okay.
Can I ask you all to talk animals and children? Because I know you all have had at least Kess, I think, has had some experiences there.
And actually, children came up in the chat as well.
Do you want to handle it, or I can?
Go ahead, you start.
So, I do notice that there are some people that have a certain affinity for some animals, and some animals that then have an affinity for them. Sometimes it connects with their otherness, and sometimes it doesn't. But I've also noticed that just odd people and energy workers in general tend to have backgrounds that make them more inclined to be very dependent on animals. So I grew up an only child and mostly abandoned. And so my cats were super important to me. And, I build my life around my cats, which sounds super sad, but whatever. And so, yes, I have a strong affinity for cats. And in some ways it did sort of inform on my early years in the Otherkin community. But I wouldn't say that necessarily has to do with my otherness. It more has to do with this life and other things. But that's not always true for everyone. So to me, it's not something where we can have a dyed-in-the-wool, that's not the right phrase, whatever, where we can have a definite rule on it. It's more case by case, and yes, I've seen it, but I don't always think it has to be involved with your otherness. And for the children thing, younger children tend to be more perceptive for a lot of reasons. And I have had children comment various things, and I've seen lots of other people have it as well. And that's just a thing. And if they're your own children, it can lead to some interesting conversations. And if there's other people's children, it can also lead to some interesting conversations. So.
Yeah, kids definitely are sometimes more perceptive than we as a culture give them credit for. And, it's probably just kids haven't had their imagination pushed out of the way as much. They haven't been taught what is or isn't real and all that. So they do sometimes pick up on stuff. And, well, I have a couple of fun stories. The one thing I always remember in this regard is I used to live in an apartment building. And there was this one kid who they had pegged me a couple of times. Like I would hear them comment about the horns or the stripes or the fur or things like that. But when I'd have friends come and visit who were otherkin, not only did this kid pick them up, but they also just had the weird luck of always being in the elevator, it seemed. And they were that kid that had no filter. So they were always like, Mommy, why are her ears like that? And like pointing out little things about these people. And it was just this really funny case. Like it was this one kid who kept showing up in the elevator over and over, but was exactly this type of kid we're talking about. Like they were definitely perceiving something. They might not have had an understanding or a way to frame it, but they were definitely picking up stuff about people.
It's interesting. So have any of you had any experience with folks who are otherkin but identify as non-human and non-animal things? The person asking the question has encountered someone who they think was potentially a star or some sort of, very non-human, non-animal.
Yeah.
Okay. Non-organic, basically. Yeah.
I mean, I know a couple
Yes.
star dragons. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's super common, but I've multiple people throughout the 20 odd years or so. Like I said, two people that jump to mind are the star dragons. They're just dragons made out of stars. It's who they are.
We had a treekin, I think, come to gather once. Remember that?
Yeah.
We were doing Blind Man's Bluff, and she did not identify a single person, but she identified every single tree, including one where a tree used to be.
Oh, I forgot.
Echo of tree.
Yeah, it's definitely not as common for whatever reason. But yeah, there are things like people who've been trees, people who are more abstract things like the star dragons. Stars actually are one that come up a lot. There's also, I've encountered people who they identify as a statue. And it's, at one point in time, there was a statue that, a culture might have revered, like, a statue in a temple or something like that. And whether or not they were a soul that got put in or, maybe centuries of worship kind of made a soul or something like that.
Yeah.
But the only thing they feel from their past is that they literally just used to be a statue.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I haven't done enough research to really talk about this too much yet, but I am definitely in the process of recording impressions and trying to figure out if I am some sort of non-organic thing. I've had a couple of interesting perceptions from other people that align in very interestingly different ways with how I perceive my own energy. So yeah, I'm in the recording stage still, but may have more for you next year on that.
Nice.
There's another question for you from the comments. If you try and ignore being otherkin, is it the sort of thing that has ways of letting you know that there's something you need to look at here?
Yeah.
I think Danny probably has stuff to say.
Suppressing any part of yourself means if it's real, like if it's there and you suppress it, it's still there, but now you don't have conscious control over it. So now it's going to leak out in other ways. Like for me, when I tried to suppress the part of me that was bird, when I tried to just be human, it actually made my shifts worse because I wasn't giving an outlet or room or space for that part of me to exist, but it still needed to exist and to express. And so it would just kind of, I would have nearly a panic attack inside because I would suddenly be a bird and I'd be in an elevator, like, and needing to get out into the open air. And I'm not typically claustrophobic. So things like that would happen. Whereas when I started accepting it and consciously allowing time and space for shifts and actually consciously shifting into bird on purpose, it became much more gentle and much more just a part of the background of my life rather than something that explodes up here and there.
And I've definitely heard other people say similar, that, specifically with a lot of Therian types, that, repression just causes an outburst of it, essentially, because they're not giving an outlet for it. For me, there haven't been many times where I've seriously doubted, ignored, and repressed stuff, but I did find it really affected my energy level. That when I was ignoring and trying not to act the way I usually do or think I should or whatever, I was just constantly drained. And it was like all of my energy was being held up by not being that. And so it wiped me out, really.
You were masking, essentially.
Yeah.
All the time. And that masking is exhausting.
And then another aspect of that, which can go into the next thing, is Otherkin energy bodies aren't necessarily the same as, a standard human energy body. And just like the physical body, there's not a standard, but there's more patterns. And part of that for me is my energy flow did not work the way all of the books said it would. And when I would try to ignore that side of me and just, do the exercises exactly as they are in the book, and, these are the energy centers exactly, and it wouldn't work. It actually did negatively impact my health for quite some time. But I found when I was willing to embrace that side of me within my energy work and, trust the flows I was feeling inside rather than what I was being told, it definitely helped. When I was ignoring it, it made me sick and it was harder for me to do a lot of my energy work. But when I accepted it and worked with it, it was definitely more effective in terms of my energy work. And it was definitely better for me just as a person.
I also want to add to that from what stories you said, it also matters how other people treat your energy body. That when people have approached your energy body as if it was the standard model, like with Western Reiki, that's been not great.
Yeah. It makes me sick, like straight up sick. I cannot do it. I avoid it at most times. It has an idea of what it thinks my body should be. And while I can definitely make my body be that, it doesn't like it, and it just makes me sick.
And it's actually funny with that, because similar experience specifically with Western forms of Reiki and making clear definitions, because what we think of as Reiki in the West is actually fairly different from what it was. If your lineage comes from Takata, it's Western, but that's a larger story. But in this whole thing of it affecting some of us negatively, I have noticed that the farther away you are from a form that easily maps onto a human body, the more things like that are disruptive. So I don't hear as many people who are like elves complaining about it. And I don't hear it as often in Therians, who are some sort of quadruped, one head, 2 arms, 2 legs, something that could easily rearrange into a human shape.
The mammal the mammal Therians have it easy.
Yeah. But once you start getting into stuff that is very different in form, you start seeing people who can't handle these things because it's an energy system that is designed to work on a specific pattern, and our bodies don't necessarily have that.
Do we want to touch on how the further from human standard that your energy body is, the more problems it seems to create through the interfacing issues you seem to have with the human body.
Yeah.
I think some
Repercussions.
of us have some opinions there.
Mhm.
Do you want to start, Theo?
You start.
If you don't want to, I can jump in.
You start. You're going.
So going off of that, but actually slightly sideways first, you do find that soul types, bodies, whatever, that easier map to human are definitely more common in Otherkin than stuff that doesn't. And I think part of that is just a practicality of if it's easier for your soul to line up with this, you're more likely to be able to live in a body like this. The farther away from it you are, the more effort it will take.
Mhm. And
And
the more of a toll it will take, I think.
yeah. And
Mhm.
so a lot of the people I know who are the more abstract kin types, like Theo and I, we have chronic health problems, but we also have the chronic health problems that, at least in some of our cases, have us in a medical textbook because WTF, the body shouldn't be able to do that.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily an effect of just being something different or being so disruptive to the human body and the human energy.
Mhm.
But yeah, it seems to be the farther away you are from that type of model, the more likely you are to have some oddity either in your body or with your health. And those can actually be useful depending on what they are in terms of trying to understand what you are. Because not always, but sometimes what happens to the body kind of makes sense when you look at what the otherkin type is. Um,
Hmm.
uh,
I only just got diagnosed last year with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobile type, and Sjogren's syndrome, which is an autoimmune disorder that attacks your moisture-producing glands. And I have not actually yet done any exploration as to how that interacts or maps or relates to the otherkin side of things. So I'm gonna have to do some thinking on that one. Sorry. See
yeah,
you.
Oh, no, it's fine. I have a ton of random, weird, chronic medical issues that they don't entirely understand or know where they come from. Some of it's genetic, some of it's just, they don't know why I do that. It has always
didn't your
been.
uterus try to grow tentacles?
It did. It did. It always tries to grow tentacles. My body tries to grow extra parts because I wish I had extra parts. 2 arms is very irritating. I have no idea why you have 2 arms. This is useless.
Or how they
Anyhow,
get anything done?
it's so useless. Anyhow, so yes, bodies will grow weird things, and I personally have noticed, and this is very non-scientific, throughout the years that certain kin types can tend towards certain body types. Not always. There is absolutely no, one rule to rule them all. But there is some trend that I have seen, and I have noticed that the less 2 arms, 2 legs you get, the more you tend towards problems. And some of that can be traced to sort of like your subtle body attachment. I'm not sure if that's exactly relevant, but like your wings, some people have a lot of back problems and things like that. But also it just, you're trying to jam a shape that does not actually fit into a vessel that is very small. And where that will break out is usually somewhere in the physical. And when I ignore those aspects of myself, it tends to relate to worse physical problems.
Someone was asking for more examples on that, but it was a bit before we were covering it. But like the one thing for me is in the mythology, Rakshasas are also known as devourers, and there was this concept that they could devour anything. Like that was how they got rid of a lot of stuff. And when I raised my hand about, the weird medical textbook thing, I've had stomach problems my entire life. And when I was 15, I think it was, they did a pH probe, which is this really invasive uncomfortable thing where they stick a pH probe up your nose, down the back of your throat, holding your esophagus open for 24 hours. And it's just this acid sensor that hangs into your stomach. And they thought there was something wrong with the machine because at one point my stomach acid registered, I think it was 0.2, 0.3, which would literally dissolve through the flesh. Like it would dissolve through some metals, actually. But my stomach also had this weird pulp inside of it that was resistant to it. And they couldn't quite figure out what the pulp was. They think it was like a byproduct of like the acid dissolving skin and then just leaving something behind. But like that, when I started coming to terms with this stuff, that was something that made a lot more sense. Like it might be a funny coincidence, but it also does seem to be thematically appropriate. The other thing with me personally that I was thinking of, if you saw me do that for a moment, I was trying to see because I can never find the scar that easily. It's right there, just at the tip. But I have horns, and near the end of my time at high school, I was diagnosed with a precancerous growth. That is exactly where I feel my horn. And it almost seemed like my body was trying to give me one of my horns back. And I'm not the only person I know of who've had something like that. Some people with wings often have like weird muscle groupings around their shoulder blades. So yeah, it can manifest in lots of weird things like that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So there was a question a little earlier. I won't necessarily throw Zosh under the bus.
Do it.
Is
But in
this
terms of
a strange coincidence that I wandered in there just
oh
now?
no,
Coincidence.
true without words. But so folks were asking, what are some of the ways that if you don't identify an otherkin type that you may be, what are some of the ways that it might show up in your life and might clonk you over the head with
Like if you repress it and don't acknowledge it, how it can manifest. And I know you've talked about vamps and not feeding and how it manifests.
and also, I mean, ethical vampirism.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to be ethical if you're not admitting that you can do something.
Oh,
Or you
yeah.
do something.
Well, I think like when you put vampirism into it, like, there's always been like that naughty question of like, are vampires otherkin, or like what, you know, where does that get categorized? And I fall on the sense I fall into the school of thought that while for some people vampire is an identity and essentially their kin type, vampiric is a characteristic that many people have, and including many other type of kin types, largely due to the fact that the things don't interface right with the body, and so there's multiple things with a higher energy need or an inefficient energy usage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With vampirism and vampiric people, it's really easy to go, you need to sort your shit because this has an impact on you and on people around you. It's a little harder to see that impact in such a visceral way with other types of kin. And yet there's such a systemic influence on like how you work with magic, how you work with energy, how you interface with your world. Just tiny little things that all add up. And I'd say that like at the end of the day, if you have like a big column of like what the fuck is this and how does this work and why when I interface with this system or why when I learn this, there's always like I am always the exception to the rules. Examine that. At the very least, examine that.
Thanks for
Danny?
Oh, that just brought something to mind. I have a theory that if you have glamour, if you have a natural glamour, it doesn't matter what kind of glamour it is, you're probably vampiric in some way. I think that because glamour to me is it draws people in. It draws attention. It draws in that attention and that focus. And so it's turning people's focus and turning people's energy towards you. Maybe it's an exchange, but like my my experience is that all fae are some kind of vampiric, even if they give back, even if it's like an exchange vampirism. They are like, glamour is a predator tool, not a
I say, yeah.
yeah,
Can you
not just
quickly
I'm
define
pretty.
glamour?
Yes, sorry. Glamour. Oh gosh, I can't actually. Can someone else quickly define glamour better?
The way
I know what it feels like and looks like, but
the way I have come to understand it is glamour is a projective ability of a lot of like fey, elfish type things, and it's an ability to either make people ignore you or make yourself almost impossible to ignore. Like if you've ever seen someone who, it's just a regular party or whatever, but there's this one person that you can't stop staring at. It's like they're sparkling, stuff like that can be a glamour.
But it doesn't always have to be. Like, you can be sparkly and not be a glamour. You can just
Yeah.
that is who you are.
So fun fact is, I ended up calling it manifestation in the codex because I didn't want to call it glamour because that was so wound up with fairy types, fae types, that I was like, I want to make a distinction, but it's basically like the ability to project some sort of presence, whether it's a "don't look at me" or a mostly, much more often, it's the come here, I'm very interesting, come closer, please closer.
There was an interest. So as an illustration, girlfriend of mine is very fae, but it is very that bright summer fae kind of fairy, and is a musician, and she thrives on being on stage, but she needs an exchange with the audience, and so the more the audience gives her, the brighter she seems, and the more bouncy she gets, until she's basically high after a performance if the audience is engaged. But it's a back and forth. Whereas if the audience isn't engaged, she's just exhausted afterwards trying to get their attention. In contrast, a bandmate of hers had the I don't exist, don't look at me glamour, what I tend to refer to as shadow glamour. And so this bandmate would try to be more visible because they were trying to get her to have more of a stage presence. And the more intensely she tried, the more she disappeared. Like, because she didn't know what she was doing. She didn't understand that there was an energetic aspect. And so she was trying to like intensify what she was doing, and it was just making the shadow glamour worse. So that it like hurt to look at her because my eyes kept wanting to slide away. So having those two on stage was very interesting.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay. Did we already cover the gender question?
No, we
thought that was interesting.
Sure.
We did not get around to that. Do we think we can do that in 5 minutes?
Maybe not.
I think we can give it a quick overgloss. So we had questions about, do we find there's an interaction between being otherkin and our gender or our sexuality and stuff like that? And actually looking at the people presenting, yes. So Rakshasa are not a gendered species. There wasn't male, female, or other things like that. And I have never felt male, really, and I don't identify as male. I identify as something between or beyond our concepts of gender. And it's really just because what I am doesn't have an expression along those lines. It doesn't map to my species, essentially. So that definitely plays into it. And I think that also has a big influence on my sexuality because, I'm pansexual. And again, it's like this concept of gender kind of never makes sense to me because in my core, there's not something that relates to that. And my attraction tends to have a similar thing where it's like, I don't necessarily get attracted to specific body types or genders more exclusively or anything because it's just not something that has any resonance with my internal stuff.
And I'm very similar. I have never been particularly inclined to identify as female, just ever. I didn't have the right word for it when I was a kid. I don't even remember what I called it. I think I just called it both or neither or none. Never none. I always have a gender. My gender just isn't human, and there's no gray words for it. It's why I'm both overly picky and not picky on pronouns, because I hate all pronouns. None of them work. And so I'm mostly just call me whatever the hell you want. I will probably respond. I like my name mostly the best. But my kin self, I hate calling it like that because it's just who I am. I don't form a distinction between them. It is just who I am. Doesn't have a proper gender, and I, like Kess, am attracted to something that I like. Like, is it in a girl body? Is it in a boy body? Is it in a not either body? Like, I don't care. It's a body, whatever. It'll change next lifetime either way. And I think a lot of kin fall sort of in those same cracks just because a lot of what we identify as isn't particularly human, and the human concept of gender is a human concept of gender relating to a human experience or the cultural human experience. And the idea that we as something else are definitely going to fit into that doesn't even make logical sense to me.
Yeah. For me, hawk is, well, buzzards are not gender dimorphic. Females and males look a lot alike, act a lot alike. The females are a little bigger. But that's about it. So hawk for me does not feel very gendered at all. It doesn't map to human gender at all. Whereas phoenix is both. Phoenix reproduces itself from itself. But as far as my gender identity with regards to otherkin stuff, weirdly enough, it was safer for me to explore and identify with otherkin than it was to explore and identify gender difference. I grew up Southern Baptist. My dad is a pastor. My mom is more conservative than my dad. And so exploring gender sexuality was not even, I was trying very hard to be a good, straight, monogamous Christian girl. And I'm none of those now, but that didn't last very long. But for whatever reason, because no one in the Christians don't typically talk about otherkin because it doesn't come up. They don't think about it. And because it's obscure. So that one was safer to explore. It wasn't verboten. There wasn't a call on it than any of the rest of it. So I could explore my otherness that way. And then once I was out of my parents' house, then I was able to let myself explore, to realize, oh, wait, okay, there's gender here too.
So there's one thing in the chat that I just want to quickly address because it's with time running out. What books can you recommend on the topics discussed? I honestly don't think there's many books out there. There's Lupa's Field Guide to Otherkin, which is probably the best.
It's probably
book
the best
out
one.
there. It's a bit dated now, but it's still a good book. And then there is also, I would recommend otherkin.com. And if you've been to otherkin.com years ago, go check it out now. It's under different management, and it's not as scary and weird as it used to be. So check out there for another source as well. Do any of you rather have other recommendations for resources?
And I feel looking at some really good resources on screen right now.
Oh God.
I'm happy to chat.
Yeah,
usually.
I'm always happy.
Yeah.
I'll be back. I'll be back for sure this evening for the Q&A. I've forgotten the time, but I'll figure it out.
And there was
there's just there's several questions we didn't quite get to.
Yeah, a lot of
most of them.
We'll have to shuffle back to the next open discussion time.
But you can probably talk to any of us on the Facebook group, because I actually made a post asking about questions. So, feel free to hit us up on that too if there's stuff we didn't discuss and you wanted to hear more on.
Yeah.
The Discord has it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think it has a channel for otherkin stuff, doesn't it? Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on this panel. I have one final question for each of you. It's okay if you don't have an answer right now. We have a couple of threads going on this also. How can people learn more about what you do, about what you have to teach, or how can they support you if that's an option?
I don't have a problem.
Reach us on the Facebook, like I just mentioned, the Facebook, reach us on that Facebook post I mentioned. I have a website, blueflamemagic.com, magic with the K, so you can find out more of my stuff and my thoughts there. I occasionally sell stuff through there, but that's one way you can hear more about me or reach out to me if you are still curious on some of this stuff.
Great.
What about you, Sia?
I mean, I have a gaming company, and I am trying to develop games, but like, I'm at a not great spot for it. So you can find me on Facebook, and I strongly encourage that. I love talking to people on Facebook. It's probably honestly the easiest way to get a hold of me. Or Discord. I'm on that too. But yeah, I don't have anything that you can necessarily support me in yet, because I don't actually want to see any of you at my day job. I help treat cancer for a living, so none of you should visit me there. But I would be more than happy to talk with anybody on Facebook or Discord or anything.
Cool.
And Danny, you no longer have a video, but I think you're still there.
I think we lost
I'm
Danny.
not sure. Yeah, Danny might have gone out of the good signal.
Nope, we might have lost Danny.
Oh, no.
Okay, so stick with that Facebook
Yeah,
post as a way to
hang
reach
on.
Danny, at least for now.
I think I.
Okay.
Okay.
What's that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay,
It was,
You're
yeah.
back.
so just
I have a Medium account, I guess, where I post articles, but they're all like psychology related articles. So I'll pull the link. I'll grab the link if people want that, but it's like a bunch of stuff on ADHD and trauma. So
Yeah, but also really good reads.
Yeah.
thanks.
All right. Awesome. Thank you all so much. And
Yeah, thank you.
we'll be back
thank
in
you
about
everyone
half
for
an hour
joining us.
for our next panel.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
All. Bye.